So my name's JT Benitez. I'm the Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources for the Ohio State University Extension in Butler County. And I'm here to talk to you all about bees and the gardens they need. We're going to mostly be talking about pollinators and bees and wasps and things like that in this presentation. And I have a little syllabus of some other things we'll talk about today. But there's more to it than just about the bees and the gardens they need. There we go. So there's me. And like I said, I work for Extension in Butler County. We've been working remotely for a really long time, so I'm looking forward to hopefully being back in the office one of these days. But while we're working at home, we're able to do these great presentations online for you and still do the same great work we can and deliver that message. So our syllabus is today is what are bees and the types of bees, what are wasps, because they're actually considered part of the pollinator group, and the types of wasps, attracting pollinators to the garden, and we'll talk a little bit about colony collapse. So what are bees? Bees are beneficial insects that pollinate flowering plants. They transfer pollen from one flower to another. They can either be solitary or live in a colony. They have one mission, and that's to eat flower nectar. And bees are vegetarians and only eat pollen and nectar from flowers. Honeybees get a lot of the credit for our pollination, but there are over 500 bees in Ohio, so we're only going to talk about the 10 most common backyard bees today. So how do you ID a bee? All bees have three body segments: a head, as you can see in the picture, a thorax, which is the middle section, and an abdomen. Their head has large, multifaceted eyes, long, slender antennae, and cutting mouth parts, as you can see there. Their thorax, their middle segment where the wings and legs are attached there, as you see. Sometimes they have the four wings there, right in that section. You can see they're all folded up there, but that's where the four wings would be. And their abdomen. Female bees have stingers, which would be at the end of the abdomen. Males, or drones, what they would be called as, males are actually called drones, do not have stingers at all. They have pollen-carrying hairs, as you can see on the female bees, which this is a female bee. They resemble broom bristles, and on the rear legs under the abdomen, as you can see in the picture there, the pollen-carrying hairs. So that's where they capture the pollen and transfer it from one flower to the other and drop it off there. And the queen is the chief of the entire operation. The gender of the ID of bees. On the left there, you've got the worker bee. She's a female bee. She's considered sterile. And in the middle there is a drone bee. She's a male, or he's a male, I should say, and he breeds with the queens of other hives. He does not breed with the queen within his own hive. So they make drones to go out and spread the diversity over to a different hive. So that's what the drone's role is. So other drones will actually visit the queen of that hive from other hives to mate with her to have more bees. And on the right, you'll see the queen. She's the female, and she's the only one that lays the eggs. So types of bees. This is my flower garden at my old house. On the left is some zinnias, and on the right is my wildflower patch there with some sunflowers and white heath asters blooming out there. The honeybee, which is the most popular honeybee, obviously, because they're the only ones that produce the honey that we need. They're from Europe. They're about a ½ inch long. Their appearance is fuzzy and light brown to black with brown and black striped barrel-shaped abdomens with a head-shaped or heart-shaped head. They're one of the most beneficial insects that we can have in our environment. They pollinate plants and produce honey and beeswax that we consume. Without them, we wouldn't have honey. They're the bee that produces our honey, our beeswax, and other things that we use them for. Their nest consists of 20 to 50,000 bees in one nest. Wild bees will nest in hollow trees, old buildings, and other cavities. And domesticated bees use human manufactured hives. A lot of those white boxes you see with the little openings in the front, which the honeybee keepers will actually build up to extend their hive bigger. They only sting to defend their nest or themselves. Honeybees die after stinging because the bee leaves a stinger in you and part of the abdomen also. So the stinger stays, and then the bee dies because it takes part of their body away, leaving them to die and exposed to the environment, and it just kills them over time there. But they only sting if they have to. Bees only swarm to divide a hive. Once a hive gets too large, another queen will develop and take some of the hive with them to the new location. And this is what allows the bee population to grow, is by the splitting of the hives. Hives may also swarm to find a new home if they don't like where they live at currently. Maybe it's been a disturbed hive, maybe it fell down if it's a wild hive. Maybe they just don't like something about living in the domesticated nesting box that humans might provide. Something might drive them away. Bumblebees. You'll see them a lot of times in the early morning. They're 3/4 inches long. They have a black body and a long face and a large body. They're covered in black and yellow hairs. They have a pollen basket below their abdomen on their rear legs. They're beneficial insects. Oh, okay. They're beneficial insects. They pollinate plants, and they usually pollinate during cool, cloudy weather when most bees are not out. Most bees like sunny weather, while they like the cooler weather in the morning. They collect nectar and pollen, and there's no honey produced, but instead a nectar-type food they use for reserves and are stored, but not in overabundance. Their nesting colony only consists of 75 to 200 bees per colony, and they're much smaller than honeybees. They like ground cavities, and they like abandoned type mouse holes or bird nests and soft materials like cotton or fur, for which they like to nest in. Only fertilized queens will survive the winter. They are not aggressive unless they are provoked. So usually they don't like to bother you, they just go on their business. The leaf-cutting bee is only a 1/2 inch long. They have a black body with light or dark hairs, pointy abdomens with pollen-carrying hairs, and their head is broad as thorax with large mouth parts for cutting leaves. They are beneficial insects that pollinate plants and collect nectar and pollen. Their nesting is solitary bees. They're solitary bees, so they nest alone. They'll nest in ground holes, wood cavities, or hollow plant stems. Young overwintering as larvae within the cells. They'll be in these little cells here on the bottom right. This is where their larvae will overwinter and then hatch out into the spring. So any of these leaves, when they're cutting into the leaves, actually does not cause major damage to the plant. It just makes it look, not as aesthetically pleasing. But so when you're clearing up all that brush and all that in the wintertime, you actually might be disturbing those bees that have made those nests in those areas. The sweat bee, one of the most annoying bees for me. They seem to always like to chase me around. They're only 1/2 inch long. There are 2 forms you see there, the bright metallic and the black and brown with light bands of hair on the abdomen type on the bottom right there. They have pollen-carrying hairs on their rear legs, and they're slender body but not bulky. They're a beneficial insect, and they pollinate plants. They collect nectar for food, but there's no honey produced. They're a solitary bee, and they nest in the ground. And they can be annoying because they're attracted to salt in your sweat. The need for the salt in their diet is why they drive us crazy, and they rarely sting us except when they're pinned against our skin. I feel like they're always after me, though. Always. They should be coming out here and pretty intensive here in the next month or so. I feel like August is the time they're usually the craziest. Large carpenter bees. They've been after my new house I'm building. Until they put the siding on. They were making holes in the exposed wood. They're also after my chicken house, which is also made of wood. They're 3/4 inches in size. They're almost like a bumblebee. They're black body with light or dark hairs. Their pollen-carrying hairs are on their rear legs, as you can see in the picture there. They're similar body to a bumblebee, but their abdomen is shiny and mostly lacking hair. And they have a round face to them. They are beneficial insects as they pollinate plants, collect nectar and pollen, but no honey is produced for us. They make their holes to keep their young in, as you can see in the top right there. And that's all that's in the bee colony there. It's just they're young, and the two bees are the one bee that's there with them. They bore into the wood of barns, houses, and trees, usually under the roof eaves areas. They prefer to have refurbished nests. So if there's a nest that's already there, they'll try to use that. Otherwise, they'll make a new one. Holes are almost perfectly circle and about a ½ inch across. They can fly very fast and erratically like a hummingbird. If you've ever been sitting on your back porch and they're making a nest or something, they're really going crazy around you, flying past you and making the holes in your wood or taking care of their young. Okay, the mason bee. A lot of folks are getting into putting these mason bee houses up for these bees. As you can see in that picture, that's a mason bee house. It's a circular type cavity for them to have their nest in. I get calls from people wondering what's going in some holes that are maybe in the side of their brick or their wooden house, whatever it is. It's a type of bee usually they're calling, and a lot of times it's most likely a mason bee because they like those cavities to nest in. They're ½ inch in size. There's two forms, the black body covered in pale hairs or dull metallic green-blue, but less hairy type bee, as you can see in the picture there. Their pollen-carrying hairs are beneath their abdomen. Their head is as broad as their thorax, and they have a robust body shape to them. So you can see their head and their thorax are almost the same size there. They're beneficial insects, and they pollinate our plants. They collect nectar and pollen, but no honey is produced for us. We can't collect any honey because they live solitary lives. They're a solitary bee. They nest in above ground, pre-existing holes or artificial areas. So like I said, anywhere there's a little cavity they can get in and make a nest, they're going to be there probably. They like anything tube-like, and they collect mud to line in those nesting areas. So they'll put mud into those nesting areas to line that up and make it a nice homey place for them. They are known to be one of the best pollinators around, almost even better than honeybees. They are faster at visiting flowers, and it's too bad they don't make honey because they are that efficient at collecting nectar and pollen from the flowers. It's too bad they're not. Maybe someday they'll adapt to it. The squash bee, very important for pumpkin and squash farmers. They're a ½ inch in size. They have a brown body with dense light hair on the thorax and bands on the abdomen. Their pollen-carrying hairs are on their rear legs, and their long antennae, and they have a longer type nose to them. That way they can get down into those deep flowers there. They're beneficial insects that pollinate plants, and they only collect pollen from squash or pumpkin plants. No honey is produced from these bees. And like I said, for a squash or pumpkin farmer, these are very important because these plants require animal pollination in order to create their fruit. Because those flowers can be so deep in there, there's no pollen flying around. So it requires a bee to go all the way down into the flower to pollinate, to collect pollen and take it to the next flower and so on. So animal pollinators are crucial for these plants right here. They're solitary bee, and they generally nest in the fields around the squash and pumpkins. And a lot of times pumpkin fields and squash fields, you're going to see the exposed dirt, or I should say soil, that you see in this picture here. And that's where they're going to be nesting at, because a lot of times that's exposed dirt to where they can get into and have those nests. Small carpenter bee, probably another one that tries to annoy me. They're only a ½ inch in size. They can be dark blue, green, and shiny, appearing hairless on all body segments. Their pollen-carrying hairs are on their rear legs, slender with shield-shaped abdomen. Their nesting type is a solitary bee, and they nest in twigs and stems, usually in that brush on the ground. So when you are cleaning all that up in the fall, they could have nested in there and laid their brood for next year. They're not known to be as big of a nuisance as their larger cousins, but they probably still bother me because bugs like to chase me around. So flies, mosquitoes, sweat bees, and whatever else, they're always after me. Well, okay, so mining bee. This is a 1/2 inch in size. They're black with light or dark hairs. They're slender. Their pollen-carrying hairs are on their rear legs and side thorax, appearing to carry as a carrying pollen in an armpit type situation. So they actually like an armpit-looking area of their leg where they would carry that pollen. They're beneficial insects that pollinate plants, and they collect nectar and pollen, but no honey is produced. They're solitary bees. They dig solitary ground nest, and they prefer a sandy type soil to have their nest. The longhorn bee is a 1/2 inch in size. They have black body covered in dense, pale, or dark hairs. Their pollen-carrying hairs on rear legs may be very long, stout-bodied, and males have extremely long antennae. They're a beneficial insect that pollinate our plants, collect nectar and pollen, but no honey is produced once again. And some of these bees are really attracted to asters, sunflowers, and daisies as one of the more popular ones. I used to grow a lot of that out at my old house, and I used to see a lot of bees out there, and I wouldn't doubt if it possibly was this longhorn bee, because we had asters, sunflowers were the most popular flowers we had growing out there. And their nesting is solitary to somewhat of a communal ground nester. So kind of a little bit of a mix. So all bees pollinate and make an impact. Honeybees are a big part, but those solitary and small colony bees are huge in impacting our pollination of our crops and our plants. So when planning for pollinators, think of all of them when you're planting your gardens. So here's all the different ones again. You can see their different size that they have here on this ruler. Obviously, the bumblebee is the biggest one there. And your sweat bee and mining bees are going to be your smaller one. So let's talk about some other pollinators. Wow, wasps, really? Yes, wasps are other pollinators for our plants. Appearance of a wasp is generally 4 wings with chewing mouth parts, a stinger, and a long antenna like a bee. Wasps are smooth and almost hairless, while bees are generally covered with hair on their bodies and legs. Wasps tend to have a slender waist, and they will never have pollen-carrying hairs, though. Nesting, certain wasps make paper nests, and you'll find them hanging from a tree or a building, and some are ground nesting type wasps. Occasionally in a car or a house, if you've had a car sitting there too long, a lot of times a wasp is usually going to make a home in that place. If your insect is eating another insect, it may be a fly or a wasp. And they are carnivores and prefer eating other insects, but they still assist in our pollination process. So here's some types of wasps. So these are yellow jackets, looks like here. Queen is in the middle, a worker, and the male is on the left there. It would be the male drone. Social wasps and solitary wasps. Social wasps will have colonies similar to honeybees with large paper nests with queens, workers, and drones, and they do not produce any honey. And their involvement in consuming flower nectar is more limited, as their diet consists more of eating other insects and possibly our bees as well. Solitary wasps will be just males and females. They will build nests and raise their young, but live a life by themselves or with a mate eating some nectar, but mostly insects. They also produce no honey as well. There seems to be a trend. Only the honeybees seem to have the honey, right? They can sting you multiple times, so they will continuously sting you until you can get away from them or swat them off. And they don't die when they sting you. Honeybees die when they sting you, but these will not. The stinger remains connected to them the whole time. So here is the legendary yellow jacket everybody knows about. They're 1/2 inch. They are bright yellow with black lines, spots, triangles, or diamonds on their abdomen. Different species may have different color patterns, so they may not always look exactly the same like that. Yellow jackets have hard and shiny bodies with few hairs. Wings fold into a narrow strip on top of the abdomen when they are at rest. And they can be mistaken for honeybees, but really once you see them up close, they definitely are not. Black-faced hornets are similar in everything to a yellow jacket, but instead are solid black insects. So they look very similar, except they're solid black. These are social wasps. They have large underground nests or aerial nests out in open places in trees and under eaves of buildings. You don't want to find their nest because that's going to be quite a challenge to get rid of them for you, because they're not very nice when you got to move them. Sometimes a hollow log, landscape timbers, or buildings in attics or wall voids, which is when that problem does occur. Several hundred to several thousand yellow jackets, or the cousin, the black-faced hornet, may be found inside these nests. That's a lot of those in those nests there, those yellow jackets. So the black-faced bald hornets there, or the yellow jackets, are very, very large nests that they can have. Nests are just used for one season and will remain vacant the next season. And the queen is the only one that survives the winter. After all that trouble they might cause you, the queen's the only one that survives, lays enough eggs to have another large nest again. So that's pretty incredible to have that. They like to capture insects and spiders to feed to their young. This can include caterpillars, flies, and crickets as well. Adults feed on sugars such as juices of ripening and overripe fruits and honeydew, which is usually a sugary substance secreted by certain insects, such as aphids. So that's where you'll see them kind of hovering around a plant and eating some of the honeydew off there, is because aphids most likely are on that plant, creating that sweet flavor for those yellow jackets to go after. And they will eat flower nectar. During late summer and fall, some yellow jackets become aggressive scavengers around human food and become common outdoors where food or drinks are available. I have a story where I took a sip of a Mountain Dew and ended up kissing a yellow jacket, and that was a rough day out there. I was working at a pumpkin farm on that day, and I had to work there the rest of the day with a swollen lip. So that definitely can make a bad day for you. So here's the black-faced hornets, similar to the yellow jackets. You can see their nest there on the right. There is the big one. The bald-faced hornet nest is on the left, and the paper wasp is on the right, which we'll talk about here in a minute. They're very similar, almost everything similar to the yellow jacket. They're 3/4 in size, and you can see the yellow jacket's a bit smaller. So they are a little bit bigger than the yellow jacket. Their appearance is partially black with white markings, just as mean though, and they're a bit bigger, so a little more intimidating. They build their nest above the ground in pear-shaped, basketball-sized nests. So if you see that type of nest right there, most likely that's a black-faced hornet. The very common paper wasp. It can be a 1/2 inch to 1 inch long. They're solid brown or black, and some have yellowish markings depending on their species. They're a social wasp, considered a social wasp. Paper wasps build their nests with a papery type pulp up in the corners of different places that you might find them. They construct only comb of cells without any protective envelope, so they're exposed open cells with their brood in there. They are sometimes called umbrella wasps because of the shape of their nest. They build nests under any horizontal surface and are commonly found on limbs, overhangs, building eaves, beams, supports to an attic, garages, barns, sheds, and similar places. Like a car sometimes, if they can get up under the hood, or a lot of times they seem like they're in the gas tank area. I guess because there's a little cavity in there, a little protective area. Paper wasp nests generally in small groups, less than 12 individuals. At most, about 100 could be found in a nest, but generally not that many. Like yellow jackets, paper wasps do not reuse their nests the following year, and the queen survives winter to start a new colony in the spring. So she's the only one that survives. They capture insects and spiders to feed their young, caterpillars, flies, and crickets, some other ones. They feed on sugar such as juices of ripening overripe fruits and honeydew from those aphids that might be on some of those plants, creating that honeydew, a sweet flavor on those leaves. And paper wasps will also feed on the nectar of flowers, helping with the pollination process. They're not as aggressive as yellow jackets unless they're bothered or provoked. And their stinger, they will sting you as much as they want. And look at that stinger up in the top right picture there. That little thin thing sticking out is their stinger there. Not something to mess with there. Okay, a Muddab Wasp. They're a ½ inch to almost 1.25 inches in size. They're solid bluish to black or brown and black with yellow spots depending on the species of them. I usually just see the one in the bottom right corner there. That's the most common ones I see. They're very slender with thread-like waist. Look at that waist right there from its thorax to its abdomen, how thin that is. That's unbelievable how thin that is. They're solitary wasps. They build mud nest in sheltered areas. These nests are tube-like cells, often positioned side by side. You can kind of see it in the picture, that clay-type soil, tubing-type nest he's got going on there. The female wasp stocks the nest with insects or spiders that she has captured and stung, and generally then for the babies, then she'll put them in there for them to eat. The stinging will paralyze her prey, and then the young will be able to eat the insects. After laying an egg on the actually that's the other part. She puts the prey in there, and she lays an egg on the prey. So when the egg actually hatches, the young will eat the prey that she has left there. So that's something interesting about that. So as she lays the egg, she will capture more prey, and she'll lay the egg on the prey and put it in that nest there for that. When the baby hatches, and then it will be able to consume that prey. So like I said, the insects and spiders, some nectar, but they're more of a carnivore type insect, but they will help with pollination. There's cicada killer wasp. So we have the annual cicadas coming out right now, and there was a OSU Extension Buckeye Yard and Garden Online post about them. So that means you're probably going to start seeing the cicada killer wasp going after the cicadas. They're 1.5 to 2 inches long, or in size, I should say, and long. They're brownish black with yellow markings on the abdomen and face. They're solitary wasps. The female digs a burrow in the soil, captures cicadas by stinging and paralyzing them, and then carries them into the burrow. An egg is deposited on each cicada, and the cell is closed off. So when the young hatches, they'll be able to eat the cicada prey in the nest with them. Cicada wasps produce 1 generation per year. The larvae spend the winter in the nest cell in the soil. The only damage these wasps cause is unsightly dirt piles dug up to create these nests. So otherwise, they don't cause much problems. And the piles usually will disappear within the first rain of the season, after they're done with it. Although their size is intimidating, the cicada wasps are not aggressive and only sting humans if they're pinned against the skin. So they are out right now because the annual cicadas are out. It's not the big ones that hatch every 20 years or something like that. These cicada wasps only eat the annual cicadas. They do not eat the ones that come out every 20 years or 17 years, whatever that is. Because then they wouldn't do too well, because every 17 years or so they would have to wait for their food to hatch. So they eat the ones that come out every year. So we have cicadas that hatch every year. It's that large group that hatches every 17, 20 years. That's the one we always talk about and you see on the news. But these will go after the annual cicadas. So I've talked about all these pollinators. So what is pollination? Just to kind of recap, that is the movement of pollen from the male part, which is the anther of the flower of one flower, to the female part of the pistil of another flower. And without pollination, most plants cannot make seeds or fruits. So it's very important that pollination happens, otherwise there's no reproduction. Many plants are wind pollinated, but animals are another part of the main process of pollination. Insects are the main pollinators, helping to also take pollination from flower to flower. Plants attract pollinators by offering rewards such as pollen nectar and floral oils, and flowers also provide shelter and gathering places for those pollinating insects. Flowers depend on repeat pollinators, so that's why they offer these rewards in order for them to keep coming back and helping to spread their pollen and being able to reproduce the plant. And how do these pollinators find the flowers? Usually petal color, scent, UV light patterns, or other nectar guides. Bees in particular use floral qualities such as polarized light patterns, petal texture, temperature, humidity, and electrostatic charge to help them locate these flowers. And that's a picture of goldenrod, a very popular flower for pollinators. A weed for many, but a very great pollinating plant. That was at my old house, growing in my field I used to let grow. So the importance of animal pollinators, they're essential to the food we eat. Some scientists estimate that 1 in 3 bites of our food we take can be traced back to the role of animal pollinators. A 2012 study with Cornell University estimates that bees and other insect pollinators contribute to $29 billion annually to the U.S. farm economy by pollinating 58 crops, including almonds, apples, berries, and squash, pumpkins, and so on and so on. Pollinators play a key role in the production of many foods in our home gardens. In addition to their role in farm and garden, pollinators are essential to the survival of many native plants. Approximately 75% of all plant species depend on animal pollinators to assist in the pollen from plant to plant. And without the work of pollinators, many native plants couldn't produce seeds to ensure plants' next generation. These seeds and fruits that often accompany them also provide important food sources for approximately 25% of our birds and our mammal species out there. And of course, our key pollinators are honeybees, native bees, flies, moths, insects, our wasps, and sometimes birds and other mammals. So the key is to grow more flowers. Trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants can provide food and nesting habitat for our pollinators. An abundance of different flower shapes, sizes, and colors will appeal to the variety of our pollinators. Different flower shapes and colors attract different pollinators. For example, a red tubular flower with a nectar reward tend to attract hummingbirds, and daisy-like flowers that provide nectar and pollen and shallow flowers often are visited by our bees and our flies with shorter mouth parts. So the hummingbirds like the tube flowers because they got a longer mouth part to be able to get down into that flower, and the bees like something a little not as deep. Now, except for like pumpkins, they can climb in there and get into that flower. So that's a little bit different, that type of flower too. Group plants together in sunny locations help pollinators find and feed on desirable flowers while expending less energy in search of plants. So keeping them close together. So that way they don't have to go as far to find those plants. Observing flowers in the garden and taking note of the flower visitors, you can learn who's visiting what plants and then kind of plan for those flowers and plants to help bring more of those pollinators in, or even add and bring different ones in. Some cultivars and hybrids don't offer pollen nectar rewards that so-called straight species do. They've been hybrid to where they don't create a desire for that pollinator to go after that plant because it no longer creates that pollen that they're looking for. So plant stuff that is native, that is what's going to bring in those pollinators. Oops. This is my old flower garden. That was at my old house there. We had plants throughout the season in that flower garden, all in the same area, so that helped bring in pollinators year-round. And we had bees, solitary, we had mason bees, we had bumblebees, honeybees, we had wasps, everything that would come there, honeybees or hummingbirds, things like that. So blooming throughout the season, so different species of bees and butterflies and other pollinators are attracted to different plants in Ohio at different times of the year. So plan for that. Queen bumblebees, morning cloak butterflies, and blue orchard bees are active in the early spring, while monarch butterflies, worker bumblebees, and worker honeybees forage from spring into the cooler days of autumn. So coordinating the blooming times with those different pollinators will help feed them throughout the different times of the year. Gardeners can help pollinators by planting flowers with a sequence of bloom throughout the growing season from early spring to late fall. They have so many different options that bloom in early spring all the way to the fall that continuously have flowers available to these pollinators. Early blooming trees such as maples, willows, and redbuds, and late season perennials like asters and goldenrod provide important food at those critical times, especially when they're coming out out of the winter season. They need those early blooming plants, and then when they're going into the winter season, they need to wrap up and do a big stockpile at the end of the year. So having that available to them. And I'll just say conserve natural areas. If you can let areas grow, let it grow. It'll provide some wildflowers. Try not to let bad weeds grow out there, but provide the wildflowers. You could probably plant a patch of an area with lots of different wildflowers that would bloom all season, and then you would provide that nice, safe, natural area for them without any pesticides or mowing that's going to cause any issues. That would allow them to be able to over-season there, lay their young there. At some point, you may have to do some maintenance there, but maybe create a secondary area where you can do maintenance there to, remove if you don't want trees to grow. If you want it more of a native like prairie, you may have to go through there once in a while to do some rejuvenation and remove trees. But otherwise, do your best to keep it as free of anything destructiveness to them. So in this picture, where will the bees and any pollinators be? They're not going to be on the right side. They're going to be on the left side. This is on the right side is a desert to most pollinators. I would say 99.9%, because there's no flowers out there. On the left side, that's where all the pollinators are going to be. So let it grow, natural meadows, that always helps. There's lots of aster out there, other different wildflowers growing out there. I'm sure there was a problem weed here and there, but I would take care of that if you could. So colony collapse disorder. I don't know how long I've been going, but I'm going to start wrapping up here. I'll just do a quick discussion about that. Basically, they don't know why. Through the years, the beekeepers have found this as an issue. In 2006 is when they started noticing this. Colony collapse. Colonies usually contain no adult bees with few to no dead bees around the colony. They contain capped brood, and they contain food stores that are not taken by neighboring bees or colony pests. And if they are collapsing colonies, they do not have enough bees to maintain the colony brood. They have a workforce that consists of younger adult bees, and they contain a queen, but they're reluctant to eat food provided by the beekeeper. So they're doing some weird things, and that's what they're thinking is leading to this colony collapse. 40,000 bees may be happy and healthy looking with plenty of food, and all of a sudden they're gone. They don't know what happened to them. What causes colony collapse disorder? Well, they're not really sure, like I said. Traditional bee pest and diseases, while these are most likely not responsible because they don't produce the symptoms, they may intensify the problem in helping create that colony collapse. Bee management, high management varies among beekeepers, but poor management can also make colony problems worse. The queen source, queen affected genetic diversity and the lineage of the bee diversity. Across the nation, only a few breeder queens are used to produce queen bees, and therefore all the U.S. honeybees have poor genetic diversity, so it could be a source of that. Chemical use in bee colonies. Chemicals used to treat bee diseases and pests have been found to have sublethal effects, even when used according to the label management recommendations, so that could be a contributor. Chemical toxins in the environment. Bees can be exposed to toxins while foraging, drinking contaminated water, or inhaling any toxic chemicals directly. Veromites or other associated pathogens. Veromites remain the world's most destructive honeybee killer. The mites pass a virus on to these bees, and the chemical treatment they require are considered possible causes of this. So what they have to do to treat the veromites also could be hurting the bees to try to get rid of them. But these mites bring a virus to the bees that can kill the hive as well. Nutrition, malnutrition, the cause, stress to the bees, possibly weakening their immune system, and undiscovered new pests or diseases that they just don't know what could be causing some of this. They believe that it could be a combination of a lot of these factors could be what's causing some of this collapse. But we just don't know. They still don't know, even after all these years. So what does it mean for us? Most people realize the importance of honeybees and associated for the honey production that they create. Um, Honey production is only a minor importance compared to bees' role, though, in pollination. So honey is important, but the pollination that they do is way more important, especially for our agriculture. Beekeepers who keep bees for pollination load their colonies on trucks and move them around the country to pollinate our crops. Growers pay beekeepers to bring honeybees to their fields to ensure adequate pollination of their crops. And in return, the growers benefit through higher production per acre, larger size and better product shape, and enhanced product taste. U.S. agriculture depends on honeybee pollination, and no one expects bees to disappear altogether. But if bees continue to die at the current rates, we may experience increased food prices and decreased food availability. Honeybees are biological indicators of possibly an environmental problem, meaning that the honeybee health reflects the general health of our environment. And bee losses are possibly symptom of a much greater problem. We just don't know, like I said, though. It's unknown. In search for the solutions, beekeepers, government officials, and scientists from all universities like Ohio State, industries, and the USDA have initiated a number of things to try to figure out what is causing colony collapse disorder. And it's safe to say that most potential causes of it are still being investigated. Like we said, we just don't know. And many granting agencies have realized the importance of these honeybees and have distributed research funds to find the cure that we need to reduce this problem. We will wait and see results. The one thing that they found, you heard on the news, the murder hornets out in Washington, they're one of the, from the different part of the world, what actually they do go after honeybees. So now we have that, hopefully not sticking around. Hopefully they can get a handle on having those around here in the future. They don't make a spread across this country.